Hi, this is Sheb, Varghese. Welcome to the Faith Colloquium podcast. Today I'm joined by my brother Sam, and we're talking about books Christians should read, books that have been formative in our lives. Thanks for talking with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming to my living room. Makes it a lot easier for me.
This is fun. As we were thinking about books that we felt like, what are like books every Christian should read, and books that kind of shaped us, we found that there was overlap between your list and my list.
Right.
And one of those books was C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first read that book, and like, could you share like the impact it had?
I think it was in high school. Our family would go to India quite regularly. And so one of those times when we were in India during those summers was a time when I would read more so. And it was great because there was far less distractions, and it was just it was sort of like a sort of serene, peaceful place. And so it sort of lent itself to a reading atmosphere, which is great. And so C.S. Lewis was someone I'd heard of, and I'd already read Narnia, and I'd heard the name Mere Christianity, and I thought, I'd heard this is a book that Christians ought to read, Mere Christianity.
Right.
And so I wanted to add it to my repertoire.
Right.
And so I remember just kind of sitting there going through it and really enjoying reading it, and that enjoying Lewis's style of writing.
Yeah.
I think it may have been the first like non-narrative of his works that I read, but you could still like see and enjoy his writing style and his tone, and I just remember feeling like the way he wrote, it felt like he was sitting across the table, just kind of talking to you and sort of like working through these ideas with you, and just going, like, hey, Christianity is kind of like this. And I really appreciated his ability to take sort of complex ideas and explain them clearly, without losing the nuance or overgeneralizing, or turning it into something else,
like making it heretical or something like that, which is always the kind of day. Like he was this like really unique gift to do that so well.
Yeah. When was the first time you read it?
I think it was also a summer when we were in India. I remember like his section on like the law, like the moral law, that like something is getting at us, right? That there's like, and that like just that like the opening chapter of like, whenever like you have like a disagreement with someone, like you don't say to that person like, oh, to hell with your rules, right? Like you kind of have like this like, oh, like, well, I actually didn't do this or something like that. And I thought like all of that is what kind of made an impact on me. Like it made an impression on me. Like his discussion on like the way that the moral law is kind of there in the universe, and like that must mean that there's something more, right? So that was like the first time I read it for fun, like, and I remember really enjoying it at the time, and he's a spiritual writer too, like it. So like he like in the kind of the last part of the book where he kind of gets into the Christian virtues, right? Like I feel like that was also really helpful, where he talks about like things like pride and charity and things like that, like kind of helping you in your kind of spiritual faith and things like that. I thought was really good for me. And so I was probably like maybe in junior high or something like that the first time I read it, and then I read it in high school again, and it was more like, because it was like we had to read it in school, like in class, and it was like more of like an academic reading. And I think that in high school I was even like more kind of intellectually able to process so much of what he had said then, and just thinking like, wow, like really being like, that's when I really noticed how good he was at doing those things that you were talking about, at being like so illustrative and making these like really important like doctrines of the Christian faith so accessible to like the average person. And like you're talking about, like it's like he's like just talking with you right here. And then like that, I think there were these like radio, like he did these over the radio, right? And they like compiled into a book. I remember in seminary, also. Like it's like a book that I feel like kind of keeps popping up, right?
Yeah.
I remember in seminary, like one assignment we had was list how many times he uses similes and metaphors. And it was like so many times. Maybe like, oh, like it's like this, or like what, or it's like this, or it's like this, right?
The kingdom of heaven is like a...
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's like that storyteller in him, right? That like the fiction writer. So I think it's very like, I think that book has kind of stood test of time. And like, it's funny that you say like already when we were young, like that was a book that was like Christians should be aware of this book and read this book. And I feel like that, like we would care, like agree and like want to continue that.
Certainly.
Like that among the Christian tradition that like, yeah, Christians should read this book. This is like a book Christians should be aware of.
Yeah. I think I've given copies of it, like copies I've had like away to people. Like when people are like, oh, like what should I read? And like, oh, have you read Mere Christianity? Like, like I think I have a copy somewhere here. You can like, here you go. You can have this copy.
Right.
And it's nice because Lewis is known not just among Christians, but like outside of Christianity, like the Christian demographic.
Right.
And so I think that also helps it be an easier bridge to kind of be like, oh, like what's Christianity about? Right. Like, well, you're probably like, have you heard of C.S. Lewis?
Right.
Like, probably yes.
Yeah.
You know, so I can say here, like he wrote a book called Mere Christianity.
Right.
It's very unthreatening. I feel like for the Christian or the non-Christian.
Right. So. And that's also like part of the brilliance of just like all of C.S. Lewis's writings, but that book is written in such a way that if you're a non-believer, like you can read it and it's like, this is like an introduction to Christianity, right? But also if you're like a Christian, you can read it and be like, wow, like this is so like rich and like wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny because he kind of described the Bible that way. Right. It's like what is he like? It's like shallow enough for like a child to like sort of play in it, and like large enough for like a elephant to like bathe in it or swim in it or something. Yeah. And I feel like we're kind of giving the similar descriptors to this work.
Right.
So I mean, I guess because he saw that in the Bible and the importance of that, and so perhaps he understood that that's a good thing to have in writing, and explanations.
Yeah, good. So that's like one book that we both would say like this is an important book and that's been helpful to us. The other book that was on our list was How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth by Gordon Fee and Doug Stewart. I don't know when the book was first written, but I feel like again when we were going to college, it was all like I feel like it had already had a reputation of like this is like the book on how to interpret the Bible. Right.
Yeah.
It was funny because we were talking about like it was never actually assigned as a textbook for any of our interpretation classes for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But I feel like that text still kind of lingered in like it always had that kind of presence. I feel like in like hermeneutics and interpretation, right? Yeah. Laying out like again, principles, I feel like in a way that was very, I think, accessible to the lay person, right? About like what does it mean to read the Bible, right? And like, and giving what you would get in like a seminary hermeneutics class,
right?
But making that very kind of plain, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about that, or did you want to say anything more?
I do remember reading it, and it lining up with, or maybe I shouldn't say lining up, but it's hitting, the same notes as what we covered in our biblical interpretation classes.
Right. And
not in a sort of like redundant or like this is old news sort of way, but just that I was happy to see like these messages or this information being delivered in a good, robust way. And from what I remember, in a relatively accessible way. So the average lay person could pick it up, and like you wouldn't have to know Greek or Hebrew in order to understand what they're writing about.
Right.
Do you know, did they write it for the layperson?
I'm trying to think like, and maybe that's part of why it was so popular. Like part of its popularity was that it was written for lay people, maybe.
I think generally. I think overall the topic of hermeneutics, biblical interpretation, is an important one that has been greatly lacking in the life of the layperson, and in like the way like church leadership equips their their congregation.
Right. So when we're discussing like books that we feel like every Christian should be aware of or read, like that's why we're bringing up this one, is because of like biblical interpretation. Yeah. A book for me that was very important, and I think Christians should read, is Justo Gonzalez's The Story of Christianity, and it's a book on church history, and I remember being assigned portions of it in college in like my church history classes, and so like we had to buy the full text, and then after I graduated college, that's like when you can actually read your textbooks, right?
Without a sense of spite.
Right. Right. After graduating college, being like, I want to read this book, like I just want to read it for pleasure and like read the whole thing, and so I read, like every night I would just read a few pages, and it's that title, like The Story of Christianity, I feel like really like captures how the book communicates what's happening. It's as a story, right? It's not like, I feel like you think like history, and like unfortunately you kind of think like, oh, like facts and like dates and like kind of boring things, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, this is like the story of Christian people, like from the beginning of the church, like to like Nicaea and Luther and like Wesley and to Pentecostalism and today, right? And the book really gave me like an appreciation for, wow, like I think I kind of like left, there were times where I was like, I had no idea, right? Like I had no idea that the church was in this position, or like I had no idea about like the importance of these church fathers or anything like that, right? And so it really gave me a story, like it gave me a framework, right, of like, oh, okay, like this is where we've come from, right? Like this is everything the church has gone through, like my goodness, right? Like, and like how much time and like energy and like blood and like has been like shed, So it was just really helpful to me to kind of give me like a standing and kind of a like, okay, like where am I, you know what I mean? And like where have I come from? And like where has Christianity been? And again, I feel like a lot of Christians just, they don't have that like framework, right? I frequently talk about like we think like, oh, Christianity just like dropped out of like heaven, like from God, and like it's just like as it is, it just like came right now, right? Right. But like that's just not the case, right? Like the beliefs and practices we have been passed on to us from generation to generation to generation to generation, and those things matter, right? I highly recommend Justo Gonzalez's Story of Christianity, partly because I feel like everybody kind of seems to say the way that he writes is just, again, it's so accessible, it's so easy to read, it's not dry, it's not dull. He writes like it's like this is an adventure, right? Like you're going through the history of the church. So like, I mean, I would say like get your hands on some like church history book, but like if you can, like read that one, I would say, because of how enjoyable it is to read. Yeah.
That's cool. So we've covered like mere Christianity, right, which is sort of like, these are like the principles of Christianity. Like this is like what we believe, like doctrines and like virtues and concepts, like conceptually, right? It's kind of like a sort of philosophical,
like a philosophy of Christianity, I suppose.
Right. And then like how to read the Bible for all it's worth is kind of like a
Bible,
a biblical interpretation how-to guide, right? And then the Story of Christianity, you get like the history of Christianity. This is a good well-rounded. It's good. Is there something that needs to be any other like supplements to that?
Well, like, so again, like my book that I think every Christian should read, and obviously has been really informative to me, is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. I think every person should read it, and including every Christian. Especially every Christian is what I would say. When I first read it, I just remember thinking like, this is brilliant. Like this, like every line he's saying is so, it's like this guy has thought of everything. It's like every like he anticipates like, well, what, but then he answers that, right? He's always kind of like 10 steps ahead of you. And the book is all about virtue and what it means to be a human being who lives well. And so yeah, I don't think anybody's topped like what Aristotle did in his Ethics. So that would be another book I'd recommend for Christians, especially as Christians are thinking about what it means for us to be conformed to the image of Christ and grow in our sanctification is the theological language behind that. Because so often we don't have the categories to really think about, like, well, how do I become a better human being? That's not maybe we think about that every now and then, but we often don't really think about, like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And Aristotle comes alongside and I think is a really, really helpful teacher to us.
Right.
So
outside of just obeying God, like you've talked about in another episode. On prudence.
On prudence,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
That's great. So Mere Christianity.
Yep.
How to read the Bible for all it's worth. The story of
Christianity.
Story of Christianity. And
Nicomachean Ethics.
Nicomachean Ethics. Not Nicomachean.
I feel like I always hear it Nicomachean Ethics.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if there's like a Greek accent somewhere. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you have a good place to like get these books? The library, your local library, maybe.
I feel like your local library should have Aristotle. If it doesn't, something's wrong.
Move to a different town.
I feel like it should have Aristotle. Like, I feel like C.S. Lewis is probably pretty popular enough that like you'd think like in like a Christian section, like I feel like you probably get C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Maybe Gonzalez's Story of Christianity in like a history section. I feel like in any kind of Christian library, I would expect that you would find all of those.
Yeah.
But we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe and please share with your friends.